Hello and welcome back to Sparks, A Tale of Ink. So it's been a while since I read the previous update, and I don't really remember what was going on. I just know that it's about this guy named Zhangken, I believe, who wants to go on an expedition, which he did end up getting, and it's to go investigate some ruins, I think. He is, the people that are following him or that decided to go are, I believe, his professors and the person that is renting the means of transportation. Um, if I recall correctly, there is like a sort of magic type thing that these characters can use that is facilitated by the use of ink. And if you have no ink, then you have no magic. I believe that, at least for Zhangken, he is very like, oh, if you can't use ink, then you're, you're beneath me. Or maybe not exactly beneath me, but he's very, he seems very uppity about, people that can and can't use ink. Of course, he can use ink. He is also very much a novice, I guess, is a good word to use. Where, like, yeah, he can use certain types of magic like fire and things like that, but like other things that might be a bit more practical, like being able to control the weight of a sword and some other things, it's like why do I want to learn that? And I believe one of his friends, who is also his professor, Gale, is able to, or wanted to teach him how to fight with like a sword. But Zhangken is very like, "Ugh, I don't need that." One of the other professors that he's going to be traveling with is like a big raccoon. I forgot what their thing was. I think it was like maybe history. But yeah, both of them are going along with the guy who owns the cart, who I believe is a merchant, and that was like the only way that they could secure passage, I guess. Anyways, but yeah, so that's as much as I remember. I know that Zhangken is a little abrasive. That's something else that I remember. But yeah, anyways, anywho, so I guess without further ado, let us continue Sparks, A Tale of Ink. Ah, can you feel it too? Change is brewing on fate's horizon. Perhaps it's time to see where this strand of destiny is leading. Would you not agree? He stared against the creatures that had piled up around the holiest of halidums, as if the darkness between stars had taken form as a mass seething with agony and hatred. Extremities and eyes swirling forever, unfocused and yet holding a grudge to all that lived. Their shapes unclear, ever shifting. They were unsure if what they were looking at was a single creature or a multitude. Those who attempted to comprehend them felt their minds slip away, gazing into the infinite that was existence or perhaps unexistence. But the king and those that had rallied for their final push could not afford the luxury of looking away. They came prepared. As by the instructions of the emissary, their weapons were coated in ink, reflecting the last few rays of sunlight that could struggle through the clouds of calamity. An army that could conquer pure despair. Led by the one and true king. They had to be victorious. There was no other choice. Chapter 2. Zhangken put his notes aside and sighed. There was no real other reference material to the creatures spawned by the demon that had attacked the old god. Yet their description, or their lack thereof, reminded him of the Dole Beasts. Were they an issue in the old world as well? This one's mine again. Ah, darn it. How does this keep happening? Zhangken's thoughts were interrupted by the two older men. He turned his head to look at what was going on. The two of them had started playing cards while Gale took over steering the vehicle. It was an easy act that they didn't mind the solitude of being focused on a single task for once. A closer look showed Zhangken that they were playing a simple card game, drawing cards and presenting the highest choice in their hands. where they both had to take turns to proclaim their trump. If your own proclaimed trump was higher than the other, you win. Generally an easy enough rule set, but if you pay no attention to your opponent's tales, it's even harder. Zhangken tried playing it a few times with some of the other students, but found that he lacked the intuition to actually win. All above, you are horrible at this. Look at all my earnings just from this. You professors really are loaded with gems, as they say. Caellam looked at the carriage's floor between them. Zhangken followed his gaze. A few vials and orbs were laying at Teeyar's boots, all filled with a variety of gemstones shaving colors. The orbs were worth a little more than the vials, but the two of them were playing with change basically. Zhangken remembered the many vials that he had to pay and cringed a little. Was Tay trying to increase his earnings even more? I honestly think that I just have bad luck is all. Maybe I'll finally win the next round. Teeyar scoffed at that and looked at the deck again, shuffling the cards. Yes. The next one will surely be yours. They kept on playing, Caellam taking his losses in stride while Teeyar celebrated every victory louder than the one before. Zhangken tried to focus on his notes once again, but the noise of the two drowned out his thoughts. Additionally, his mind kept flashing back to the market. Why was Rusho there? It could not have been a man who just looked similar to him. He had the exact same notches in his ears. Zhangken looked in the direction of the slowly setting sun and sighed. By now it was Yearsky Day, which meant 4 days had passed since they set forth on the first day of the month. He wished that he could see the wonderful Yearsky, the deceiver, in the sky, but during the season it was hard to see. Whenever it was visible, astrologians kept an eye on it with their tools, as its strange surface changed color day by day. The heart, which they called the sun, overshadowed all other planets, but at times others were visible as well. Yet during night times, even the moon's light, people and especially merchants needed a lantern light. It was no trouble for him to keep them aglow so they could drive through the night, but his ink was running low. He should remember to ask Teeyar about it on the next stop. As his eyes focused on the ink in his ring, something moved on the edge of his vision. Likely an animal that strayed out of the woods and got scared by the mass or the noise of the carriage. Some birds and smaller animals like rabbits came closer to them every now and then, but didn't fully approach, usually stopping in their tracks. He stared at a bird with a wonderful blue coloration swooping over them, and before landing on the roof of a nearby well, with a withered white roof. Zhangken raised a brow and addressed Teeyar. Say Teeyar? I've been meaning to ask, since we've passed a lot of them. But how come there are so many inkwells on the side of the road? Oh, it's been 3 days and now you deem me worthy of your attention? It was true. They had long left the tidal fields of the Academy City behind and instead traded them for forests and unkept plains. Only every now and then, they could see a ruined windmill rising from the flat fields at their side. Smaller villages had slowly been decimated or abandoned, and their people fled to the capital. Not once had he tried talking to Teeyar in that time, probably because he was still very bitter about the arrangement that they had made. Caellam wasn't happy with the thought of some greedy merchant getting his paws on something of important historical value. So he simply avoided the merchant, which was hard considering the cramped space that the group called their home for the last few days. Well, not even an apology. You can be glad that you didn't ask for a favor. Well, they are for merchants and traveling groups that rely on their spark. Mercantile roads are built in a very special way that allows ink to pass through them from the cities and villages they connect. You know, because they all have their own reservoirs of ink below them. Might as well have asked Professor Know-It-All in the first place. Actually, Zhangken's voice strained with regret just thinking about what he was about to ask. I was just wondering why we brought so much ink if you could just refill on the roadside. He turned his head to talk into his clothes. Also, I, need a refill for my own ink. Well, well. There is a relatively simple explanation for your first question. I simply refuse to bring my own bucket made of glass for the rare occasion that I bring spark, using folk with me. What do you mean? The wells here don't have their own buckets? Of course not. Well, of course is a little extreme. What? They had them in the beginning but got stolen. With how valuable glass is, they don't leave them just on the roadside. The guild decided not to replace them anymore. The cost was too high. For your second question, we're about to take a rest anyways. I need to let the carriage take a break. Plus, I gotta check if everything is fine with it. Mechanically, see? I'll let you fill up once we rest. Zhangken didn't look forward to camp either, though sleeping on something softer than the carriage's wood did sound enticing. But he knew what else setting up camp would entail. Combat lessons with Gale. Zhangken helped get everything of import off the carriage. Some bedrolls, a small crate filled with foodstuffs, and some other smaller barrels that Teeyar pointed out. They were lucky that no one really needed a tent with the temperatures picking up and no rain. The green moon also began to slowly rise. Soon it would bask the world below in its veteran embrace. Zhangken idly ignited the campfire prepared by Caellam. He was happy enough to gather firewood and brought some herbs and berries as well, very much ready to prepare a proper meal. Full glad that I am able to see nature doing what it is meant to do. The rainy waters have been absorbed by the trees and brushes, and the berries that did not need any stun to flourish are free to harvest by the animals and people alike. Exactly 30 after 3 days of summer per bush. Don't you think that is eerie? Knowing exactly how much any tree yields, knowing the exact angle the tree branch will bend, when a berry will fall and become food for another animal? Do you truly believe so? Why ever have you decided to study the very nature of these patterns, then to internalize them? Zhangken had no answer for it whenever he observed something that he couldn't stop himself from internalizing it. People had patterns as well, simply not on the easily predictable level as nature did. He was tired of the unpredictable nature of requests from his family and the people at school when he was younger, so he attempted to read them. But that only made him observe nature more. I grow tired of your dislike of our world, my friend. I tried changing your mind, showing you the splendors of the world, and yet you deny it. I don't deny it. I simply feel like it's not right. In the old world, things were different. I would simply like a better glimpse into it. Then simply gaze into the hearts of the people. As much as I and the Ascendants hate it, we are the most chaotic in this world of order. It is here that you find the unpredictable that you crave so much. It is because of this unpredictability that you need to learn to wield a sword, to defend from those that even further deny their place. Those that would forgo the safety of the cities and live their lives by the doctrines of violence and denial. Folks like you are their easiest prey. That is why I cannot let you go further without studying the blade. There it was. For a moment, Zhangken had hoped that Gale forgot. Listen. I know you are likely still shaken up by what happened, but you should not neglect what might help you avoid such a situation again. Shaken up is not what I would call it. Gale, it feels like I saw a ghost. A what now? Never mind that. I haven't seen him in years, received letters that everything is well, so naturally I thought that he was back in Sly. But now that he was there, for no discernible reason, without even telling me? Please calm down. Maybe you are just confusing your assailant with him as your thoughts wander to this man that you speak of. No one saw anyone of that description that you gave. A fox with perfectly symmetrical notches in his ears. With how rare foxes are in the first place, I would surely have received a message of him being found. But no more discussing. We are to prevent further such happenstance. Starting tonight. Gale reached into one of his coat pockets and produced a training sword. One different from the one that he had handed out to Zhangken previously. They drew their own in turn. But instead of standing on his opposite, they positioned themselves next to Zhangken. Wait, what are we doing? I thought that we were practicing. We shall. But before you can begin to fight an opponent, you need to make sure that your stances are correct. As we established, fighting with the sword is very dynamic. Yes, depending on the sword size, shape, and weight, the wielder can take different stances for different fighting styles. I've done the mandatory reading. Indeed. But there is something that I left out for the sake of convenience. The fact that, thanks to me, swords can have any weight, shape, or form that you want. This ability lends itself well to make my own fighting style dynamic and unpredictable. In theory, at least. Zhangken mumbled that to himself, reminding himself that Gale had never fought in any serious battles. What was that? Oh, just thinking out loud. Anyways, for our practice sessions, I would like to give you a near weightless half sword. A half sword? You mean an, what was it called? Ein Halbander? Yes, indeed. It was also called a bastard sword. The two turned to Caellam, who had settled down at the campfire with Teeyar. He had turned to Zhangken and Gale while shuffling his deck. He's already making me lose every ounce of patience that I had prepared for his general vicinity. Additionally, he will inevitably end up with not a single gemstone to his name. Zhangken let his gaze linger on the man for a while. There was something about him that made him ooze self-confidence. He was sure Caellam would not lose, whatever it was. I'm not all too sure about that. But back to the sword. Zhangken put his eyes on the blade instead. He handled a few of them back at home when he helped his mother in the forge. Aren't these usually relatively heavy? Correct, which is why I am taking care that this one does not have as much weight. Zhangken felt the spark through his bones. The world went blurry for just a moment and he regained his composure just as fast. While others felt a strange effect when Gale used their spark, Zhangken felt as if he had toppled over whenever he was around when it was used. He had asked about it once, but Gale did not understand. Adjusting to the shifted truth came naturally to them. A question for another day. Now take it with either one or two hands. We go from there. Alright, then let me just... As promised, the sword was nearly weightless. It was much different from whatever he expected or was used to. Handling a blade with barely any weight felt almost wrong to him. He settled with a sword in one hand, having found a comfortable grip. We will work on details like that. They gazed specifically at his hand. Later. What is more important now is your stance. Gale showed their own form, one foot forward, the other one to the side, sword in one hand, pointing forward. Sky stance lets me lunge and execute quick hits, which is why I favor it. You, on the other hand, want to be defensive. Normally, I would be teaching you every little thing about the best windows to strike and how to read your opponent, as well as the stances that they are using. However, that would simply cost time that we have not at our disposal. So I am asking you to stand like this instead. From there on, time passed solely with their training. Gale quickly noticed that Zhangken had issues copying their poses due to his poorly trained muscles. In turn, they went through beginner poses, redirecting the flow of energy of receiving blows, keeping an option for escape open at all time, minimizing exposure of vital spots even without armor. Even with the light weight of the sword, the movement took a lot of energy out of Zhangken and he had to take regular breaks, during which Gale schooled him in other stances, and how they would react to each other. Beginning with the known origins of stance-based fighting, which could be traced back to the old world. Back then, stances were named after similarly to nature, or where in relation to the body of the weapon was held. Nowadays, for the sake of having a simple connection to the things people knew, they were named after the elements. Gale had turned their blade over in their hand, angling their arm in turn, pointing the tip of the sword at an imaginary enemy. The aggressive flame stance is better than the defensive sea stance, which in turn overrules sky. Imagine it like the children's game. One thing is weak against the other. Rock, paper, scissors. Rock beats paper, paper beats rock, scissors beats paper, right? Back when I was younger, kids hated losing and made up things like ink beats everything. I'm just assuming that there is no such thing with stances. Indeed, without. We are adults and have to accept that we lose. Not like sore losers do not exist out there. For just a moment, their eyes wandered to the campfire where Teeyar was sitting. Zhangken could feel the disdain in their voice. Anyways, it is not quite that easy for fighting though. Just because I fight in flame against someone in sea only means you have an advantage, not an assured win. You understand. Splendid. Then answer me this. How come this general rule is so easy to be forgotten? Because of the substances? No? Flame can shift into smoke, which is more than a divergent maneuver. Sky can be heavy-hitting with thunder, things like that. As Zhangken mentioned the stances, Gale effortlessly changed into them. Smoke had them ducked out slightly, sword-tipped pointed to the ground. Lightning had them press their heels together, lifting the sword up next to their head, sword-tip reaching up to their ears. Everyone has their own style, be it with art, in combat, or with their spark. So for the sake of familiarity and shifting elements, the stances were adapted and named after such. But then, what about people like me, who cannot adapt or change? Do not overthink. Even people without sparks are constantly changing to what is expected of them. Many people think that the blessing of the Sovereign is one of stasis. But then, Seeker would not turn. There would be no night or day. No seasons would change. People would not grow up. No, he blessed us with a world of expectations and how to change in order to overcome what we knew is coming. And that is in and of itself the truth of stance fighting. A sword fighter is expected to use flame, sky, sea, or earth. Wait, but that leaves two more. Are they not used for fighting? Theoretically, they are used. But they would demand much adapting from the fighter, wielding a blade such as this. Anyways, enough theory for today. I think that it's well time for... A voice from the further away broke through their discussion. Caellam had stood up, a metal pot waiting over the fire in front of him. Zhangken hadn't even noticed the smell until now, fully absorbed in the lesson that he was. As expected. You are by far no master yet, but you are showing willingness to try. Because I have no other choice. Is it truly such a horror to exercise your body? Zhangken didn't answer. Thinking back to his time in Salai, a lot of people had told him that it was necessary to keep a certain physique if he wanted to take on any of the professions in the humble village. Even Rusho had teased him about it every now and then. Yet now that he felt the blood rush to his beating heart, he couldn't deny that it felt at least a little nice to use these dormant muscles. Gale waved towards him as they moved further back into camp. As Zhangken followed, something moved in his peripheral vision once again. As he turned his face to track it, there was neither movement nor noise. A trick of the light, Zhangken thought. Surely just illusions of his tired mind. The food helped a lot. Just as his father had always said, food is not just energy for your body, but fuel for your soul. The hot broth, chunks of meat and vegetables, as well as a good portion of cooked rice rested well in his belly. Now that he was resting with the others, Zhangken also realized how much he needed to just be in one place. The slowly swaying trees and rustling fields were a good contrast to the ever-changing streets and creaking wheels. He felt at ease more than he expected and he was grateful for it. It wouldn't be long for them to get to their destination, just thinking about it made him feel stressed. He breathed it in, taking in the rich scent of wood and the last bits of petrichor carried by the winds. Caellam happily patted his belly, having eaten the most out of anyone in the crew. Granted, he was also the biggest. Did you cook this, Caellam? I didn't know that you could make something this good. The spices and the ingredients reminded me of something my grandma used to cook when she was in a hurry. Oh, did you seriously think that all that I brought back from those expeditions was knowledge of constructs and history? Huh. I always need to learn something of everyday use. Sewing patterns, recipes, stories. Not to speak of the insurmountable amount of debt that I have the privilege of paying back. Yes, secondary worries. For you, perhaps. I never knew gyms were such an issue during expeditions. For some reason, I always figured people would join out of the goodness of their hearts, or their instinct to do good, learn about the past, to be altruistic and be a good person, to see one more man or woman smile. All that stupid sentimental shit. Well, I figured people would be a little more altruistic than just out for the profits. Learning about what made us who we are, about the people that shaped the world before religion. That is a reward enough for me already. Which is, of course, a commendable stance, but it is not how things go. Nah, not everyone can be as generous as I, or us, I'd say in this case. Privileged as I am, I basically want for nothing. But the same isn't true for everyone else. And I need experts by my side, especially on different continents. How come? You seem to be a true expert regarding the whole process by now. Oh, the process is not an issue. It's the people. While the sovereign unified language, remnants of older cultures still remain in their lands and their mannerisms. So I'd like to consult those who have any knowledge regarding those. Because the ruins of the old world still contain remnants of those old cultures? Exactly. Language, artwork, books, and sometimes even technology. I might know a lot, but not everything, so I need someone who knows things about the region. You're so adamant on letting those things survive. Why do you think the Sovereign separated us from all those objects and languages of the past? Surely not because he intended us to find them once again. Zhangken felt a pinch of anger cooked up in his bowels, but Caellam answered as jovially as ever. There are many clues that things straight up disappeared. Some ruins seem hollowed out, entire rooms missing, as if objects simply disappeared. Walls with strange hollows in them when you cut them open. Imagine a person with all of their veins removed. It looks eerie. By this, I surmise that the Sovereign had the power to make things vanish into thin air. And the objects that you are still able to recover are meant to be found? So despite the best efforts of those damned ascendants worshipping every little footstep of that damn clad in white throne warmer, you're telling me that we're supposed to investigate our past? That our mighty ruler of the New World doesn't even mind us looking into the old world that he took so much effort in hiding from us? Ain't making no damn sense with how much they... Ugh, whatever. Did you get permission for this recipe at least? That's just food. I don't see harm in not getting it approved. The rest is mostly interpretation, but, well... Divine reckoning has yet to strike me down. So I assume that what I am doing is at least not wrong. Gale only slightly shook their head over this and ate away at their food. After eating a bit of it, they sighed and left the rest of their bowl untouched. Once they were done with the food, Gale had begun to patrol the vicinity. Zhangken told them about the shades that he had seen, so they wanted to make sure that the group wasn't stalked by any brigands or wild animals. Caellam and Teeyar took another break from their card game, and Teeyar sat across from Zhangken on the other side of the campfire. Alright then, lad. It's time, wouldn't you say? Huh? Zhangken was surprised by the sudden conversation. Had he missed something in the contract that he had never fulfilled? He noticed his ears folding back and cautiously had to perk them back up to show no sign of fear. You avoided me all day and while traveling. So now you owe me. Wait, no. You didn't say anything about extra costs along the way. I don't even have a single gen left on me. What else do you want from me? Tss. The merchant let his lips flap as he blew out air. Changing positions, he got even more comfortable on the floor. Nah, I don't need any more gems from you. What I want from you is a story. Nothing fictional, rather a story that is personal. You're a fascinating young man, and I simply need to know a little more about you. That sounds not very appealing. Oh, come on now. I'm not courting you or anything. Just kinda curious. You're 30, studying, got a useless spark in your eyes all messed up. Oh, I don't think that you're gonna get anything out of him. Not even I have any idea what actually happened there. And let me tell you, I do think that he trusts me a fair bit more than you. Caellam's voice came from the carriage. In the green moonlight, Zhangken could see him touch the inner walls, probably tracing the refills. That's so. Then let's make it a trade. You tell me something about you, and I'll tell you how I got these. He pointed at the golden teeth in his mouth. Zhangken had to admit that he was curious about Teeyar, but how much was he comfortable revealing of himself to a man that clearly doesn't mind lying to get what he wants? There was no need to step out of any comfort zones, so he was at the brink of refusal. Until Caellam's voice echoed in his head, the moment the professor let out a strange noise of delight mixed with annoyance. No risk, no reward, no discovery. Would you rather die dumb because you were afraid to get hurt? He looked over to Caellam, who had apparently discovered whatever he was looking for. The man jumped in delight like a prancing deer as he ran across Gale, hugging his fellow professor and twirling with them, using such force that their feet lifted off the ground. Unhand me at once. I have a duty to fulfill. The two disappeared into the brush, while Gale re-emerged moments later, annoyance written all over their face. Perhaps a little risk would benefit Zhangken after all. Looking at him, just happy about any kind of new discovery. Perhaps he should indulge. After all, Caellam was leading a wonderful life. Alright. Well, that was a quick change of spirit. Teeyar looked up from a scroll that he was scribbling on with his quill. Zhangken looked at the moons and noticed that he had been in thought longer than expected. I can share something, if you have anything of interest yourself. Now that is music to my ears. Let me see. Where do I start? How about... Oh, you are beginning? I thought you wanted mine first. Oh, no. A loud laugh almost escaped his lungs, but Teeyar quickly masked it with a cough. His tail began wagging just a bit as he leaned backwards. While you were entangled with learning about the past and how to handle the sword correctly, you neglected the third profession of this expedition. I don't think that I understand what you mean. You always this slow on the upkeep. How uncharacteristic. The man's telling you how to dabble in the art of the trade. How come you are not letting me explain anything? I have things to say and I would like to finish them, please. Don't want to give you the satisfaction of being right is all. Zhangken was bemused by this. He never took Caellam to be so petty, but it did make sense right now. After all, Teeyar posed the danger of taking valuable relics from them. So Caellam had to be one step ahead of him. Though he had hinted at having some sort of plan to stop Teeyar from getting what he wanted, he never really elaborated. Perhaps making the merchant wary of his presence was part of it. Despite losing the card game battle, he seemed to have left a mark. No matter. Unless you want to explain my past to me by yourself, Professor. Oh, I probably could. I have a good hunch as to who you truly are. But I need just a few more clues to sort that out properly. So go ahead, I'll be listening. Caellam had sat himself down at the campfire as well, leaving Gale patrolling the perimeter. Under his coat, the well-hidden tail swished with excitement. Zhangken himself did not exactly feel it, but perhaps it could be a nice distraction. Teeyar's tail, on the other hand, had stopped the motion. He seemed to ponder if he truly wanted to carry on. Now then, if you promise me not to interrupt. Let's start. Ah, yes. I grew up in the capital city of Elben, together with my twin sister. Neither of us can to this day remember our parents, as our mother passed away when giving birth and our father died before we were born. Barely any pictures or records exist of them, despite us being part of the house that had some sort of higher standing back in the day. As we grew older, my sister discovered her natural talent very early on. She did not only simply possess the ability to reshape, but also to redistribute. It was unheard of, and as far as I know, it still is. So, she was treated as a prodigy, although the sovereign refused to see her. What she did get was a formal invitation to Twistwood, which also rarely happens. She graduated swiftly, learned, and connected with herself. Not so much for me. By age 16, I still didn't manage to connect to any of the elements. It felt like a weird twist of fate. My sister hired tutors to really make me understand what I had to do, to no avail. No matter what we did, spiritualists, historians, anyone in the field of medicine. I knew that I had huge footfalls to fill. After all, we were heirs to the bloodline of the legendary general Caellam, the man that fell in assault of dull beasts on the capital on his own many hundred years ago. Yet this legacy felt much less like an aspiration and more like a burden. My sister quickly blazed a trail for herself while I was left in her shadow. She quickly learned to wield her powers in multiple weapons. Even her diplomatic advances with other high houses from the capital and lands beyond were seen as groundbreaking. Seeing all of this, there was no place in my heart for hope. I stopped eating, stopped leaving my room. Until one day, by chance, I was left alone at the estate. My sister had arranged that I was cared for. Maids, butlers, people making sure that we don't lose all of our money while she became the public face. That day, or perhaps just that one moment, I was truly alone and someone was at the door. I answered and was greeted by a man in his garbs that I had never seen. A striking hat and a wonderful golden belt together with it. He introduced himself as a merchant, here to pick up some wares that we purchased and to sell in return. I had a basic understanding at least and began the transaction. With just a few words, he enticed me into this world of numbers and reading people. He introduced me to a wide array of wonders that went much further than what I had been taught. As it turned out, what I lacked in affinity with the elements I made up with a deep sense of empathy and quick wit. He told me of people and places that I could never dream of, deserts and oceans and the kindest of people. Then and there I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to see the world and bring smiles and joy to those around it, seeing all the wonders that I would never see if I stayed where I was. After I began my studies, my sister mocked me for my ambitions. "We are destined for greatness. Why give up your ambitions and be a lonely merchant? You could have any other role in the city. We are destined for greatness. Why stoop so low and be a lowly merchant? You could have any other role in the city." I am not sure if she was mad at me or at me stepping out of her shadow. After all, those ambitions were never truly mine. One day after her persuasion failed once again, she dragged me to the sparring field. She had been recruited by the Knights of the Sovereign, protectors of the realm. Gave me a sword and told me to defend myself. I didn't stand a chance. In what world could I? Any blade that I had attempted to wield became at best a tool to harm myself. At that point, I had long decided that the quill to be my weapon. On my knees, she turned around, mocking me in front of some knights that she had brought along. So I stood up and hit her, a reinforced vial of gemstones in her hand, backing the blow. I heard the crunch as her fangs dislodged from her skull. She repaid me in kind, of course. I left then, making sure that she understood that it wasn't the last that she saw of me. I had to pay her back in some way. These gold teeth, my constant reminder of what she owes me. A life of respect. Well, there you have it. That is how I got these golden fangs. I would have expected you to look much more impressed. Not a single tear. Not watery eyes or sniffling. No touched hearts. Nothing. Nothing that I can feel, no. While your acting and delivery could use some improvements, some things are just, odd. Instead of the tears that he had expected, Zhangken and Caellam both had furrows in their brows. Both were somewhat in thought. Zhangken even jotted down some notes while Teeyar was talking. How old were you again? What? You know, how old were you when you swore your vengeance? You said at 16 that your spark hadn't awoken. Hey, that's information that I won't disclose. Why do you care? Because it feels like you aren't telling us something. Something important happened and it's just completely missing. Where are you getting that idea? I told you everything, I swear. Well, the other merchant I talked to, Fierno, he said that you haven't been a merchant for too long. And just looking at you, well, you are definitely older than 30 by now. Getting into the Mercantile Guild doesn't take 10 years either. There's a very obvious gap here. What did you do between swearing your vengeance and becoming a merchant? Your sister's identity is pretty obvious, so you clearly haven't killed her. Which means that you haven't gone into hiding after the act, just to resurface as a common merchant. No. Something made your emotions stew. Perhaps you exposed yourself to her longer, or maybe you kicked each other's teeth in 10 years ago, but everything beforehand lies back much longer. Hey now. You're just piling up on me. I told you everything that I desired to. Anything else would have simply been useless pratter. I have any right to not talk about things that I do not desire. Sure, but that makes most of your story useless. It's great to hear that you were apparently born sparkless, but we knew that already. And that you are, as a relatively new merchant, managed to gain momentum quickly with your wares meant that you had a lot of funds. Plus, weren't you using title for yourself? Only nobles and certain other folks are allowed those. Alright then, I guess you weren't happy with my tale. But that doesn't matter. I told you my story. His tone had shifted drastically. A slight snarl hid itself in those words. The ears poking out of his hat had shifted backward. Zhangken decided not to agitate him any further. Alright then, you gave us something, but I can't say that I got much of worth. So don't expect much of a value in return. Hey now, I spilled my guts in a heart-wrenching story to the both of you, and yet you think that it isn't worth much? You break my heart. Sure, your poor little shriveled up heart is probably suffering the most here. I am very interested in your heritage and family though. Oh really? You actually got something of worth here? Cal was a renowned war hero many years back. Supposedly he survived the calamity of old and kept on being a defender of the people in the New World. Not much information is known about him, so if I get the chance, I'd like to pick your thoughts on your heritage. There is also your sister. With all that we know, your bloodline might actually be special. I'll come back to you about it later. Perhaps we can get some clues as to why some people nowadays completely lack the ability to awaken a spark. I'll consider it. If what you are giving me is right. But first, your turn, boyo. Zhangken rolled his eyes. After what he got, he could at least keep the story abridged. Not that it was interesting in any way. But some things just had to stay private. Alright. My family is originally from Shorelands. We lived in a pretty busy harbor city in the Senak, so the trade route to the capital in the flats was optimal. My father inherited a bakery, while my mother took up the practice of the smith. Both of them were blessed attuned to flame. All of my siblings awoke into flame as well. Except for me. My family and friends assured me that the same would happen to me eventually. Never came to pass though. In a world that promises everyone to find their way, I felt lost. Until we had to move. It happened suddenly. My parents, 2 of my brothers and my sister came along to Silai, a little town near the northern border between the flatlands and the shorelands. Father said that it was important but didn't explain further. Things were hard at first, at least for me. People didn't really like me, and where I wanted to help, I was more a liability than anything else. I hid away in my books, wondering if there were more people like me growing resentful of the sovereign. Why would he create a world so hostile towards people like me? People that didn't fit in. Until one day I wandered out a little too much after an incident and found someone in the woods. A boy around my age, shivering, malnourished, surrounded by books of his own. I took him home and fed him, finding out that he didn't even talk. Both of us, outcasts in our own rights, became fast friends. We grew up together and slowly our community taught him how to talk. How to live, how to really live. We quickly grew up close. How could we not? I watched him flourish much more than I did. He naturally picked up on anything that he was taught somehow. So naturally, despite or maybe exactly because we were so close, we had a harsh fight. A disagreement of how to live our lives in the future. That same day I lost my eye. That same day I awoke to my spark. It was then that I decided that I would like to go to Twistwood. Which brings us here again. How insightful. I think not even when you were inaugurated did I hear this much information about you. That's right, mighty strange lad, coming along, one-eyed, all bandaged up, and barely any other things to his name. But you were pretty inquisitive, especially about the sovereign and how the world worked. Not that I or anyone could help you too much, really. We still know virtually nothing other than what we were told outside of religious texts. So a man that was interested because of his own past and out of religion, well, just felt like I had to help a little. No, wait. Is that all? That's barely anything. How did you lose your eye? And how are you even... No, never mind. Well, I kept it short. My motivation is why I'm here. That's what you gave me. I also feel like my eye didn't need any gory details. I can keep private what I think is the most important to me. At least tell me why you aren't even wearing an eye patch. Oh, yeah, Father bandaged me up back then. I just kept changing them, never thought about getting a proper eye patch. It's like a memento at this point, I guess. I love my mother and siblings dearly, but my father has always been closest to me. He touched the bandaged eye, thinking about everyone that he left back then. It wasn't fair, neither of him nor of Russia. They deserve some sort of goodbye. Partings are supposed to be celebratory, but he just walked out of the door that day. He simply had to leave. There was no other path. Despite everything, I think I'm glad. If I hadn't found Russia back then, I can't even imagine my life without that. I haven't even done much yet, but still. It's been maybe a year since then, but look at me now, already on my way to my first expedition. Truly, here I thought you would have been driven to become an explorer regardless. Were you not curious about the workings of the world, or perhaps interested in picking up any other profession? I simply cannot fathom that you would have stayed the way that you were. Zhangken felt his chest tighten a little at the question. Perhaps he would have stayed curious, even moved out somewhere to learn something new. But he was challenged to a new life after that. His fingers tensed up and he had to catch himself not to breathe wildly. Why had he become so adamant about staying? He would still be with Russia had they not fought over such a small thing. Had none of it happened, I would have likely just accepted it, to live on the fringes of what the world expects. Maybe I would have never questioned not fitting in, or all those others who didn't fit in either. But now I owe it to myself and to them to find out where all of the struggle that we have really comes from and where it goes. Despite slowly getting a grip on how to work my spark, it still feels wrong. All of it. A small flame appeared on a patch of grass, slowly, yet hungrily eating up all that it could find. Blades of grass that all bent the same way, leaves strewn into a pattern that others were blind to. It would destroy this meticulous artwork of nature. But even the flame's movements were predictable. He had seen it spread over the grass like this before. Zhangken held his fingers over it and quickly determined the patterns with which it moved and directed it, like a puppeteer. Left to itself, it would leave the ground scattered. with yet another pattern to be predicted. What do you mean, wrong? Looks to me like you quite enjoy putting things on fire like that. Not quite. Another flame reshaper would be able to place flames in the air as well, or place the flame directly in a glass case, envelop the surface of a lake in a sea of red. Yet my flames only hold onto things that actually burn: wood, grass, coal, and the such. That's not how it's supposed to be. The flame disappeared and a familiar warmth crept up to his chest before dissipating. A natural phenomenon to all of those who could store something inside of them. At least, that's what he said. No one really knew where redistributed elements went. I assume that it is due to your late awakening. Instinct never took over, so you were influenced by other rules. Perhaps subconsciously you are holding yourself back. Your whole family awoke to flame, hey? Perhaps your spark is, in its core, a different one altogether? Perhaps your spark is sky, and you somehow managed to shift static or friction in such a way that they cause a fire. Some artists have that issue, engineers too. They do what they think is right, getting influenced by what they grew up with. But ultimately they find comfort in practicing things their way, not anyone else's. Well, at least you got one. Never awakening to one at all is even worse. I don't think that it's all that bad. Eh? You telling me that you don't got one either? Caellam had calmly taken out his deck of cards once again and shuffled. With a raised brow, he asked Zhangken if he wanted to participate, but he shook his head in turn. He shrugged and gave out the cards, Teeyar idly accepting them, still startled. But you work at the twice-damned academy, and you do these expeditions. Yep, never needed to rely on a spark from my side. Sure, the help from the others was always appreciated. But how did they let you study history in the first place then? They only let you study there once you awoke. Or got the gems to pay up. Well, there is a third option. You could also simply trespass in one of the ruins and find something of great value. He did what now? Both of them look up suddenly. Zhangken hadn't even noticed that his gaze was drawn mostly to the fire. His ears flicked as though thoughts were racing while Teeyar's tail began wagging. For a moment, Zhangken thought that Caellam would use the confusion to win the current card game round that had been going on. Yet he struck to play it fair. If he were playing fair to begin with. He trespassed into a set of ruins, navigated them without a scratch, and emerged with secrets of the old world. If I recall correctly from the records, he found patterns for the coat that is currently resting on his shoulders. Supposedly it is a symbol of a leader or a commander. Well, he asked a skilled threadweaver to have it done, and then showed up to the Old World branch of the Historian Association. And after that, the Academy. They were lacking a proper history professor. Professor Norrand is a perfectly good teacher. Yes, he is, teaching spark theory and application. But he stumbled through history like someone who, at best, scanned some historical volumes. How would you know? Professor Caellam. Professor Caellam, are you telling me that you listened to his lectures? Perhaps I did. Without being a rightful member of the student body? Mayhaps I wasn't. Oh, would you look at that? He let the 3 final cards in his hand sink to the ground, looking towards Teeyar, whose hand was empty. Looks like I messed up. Lost again. What a pity. Teeyar looked at his own now empty hand, probably not realizing that he had won either. Caellam himself didn't seem to care, keeping his calm demeanor. Gale, on the other hand, was trembling, exhaling audibly. Sorry, I was more focused on your act of felony. Bravery. I wouldn't have believed such deeds were possible without being aided by a spark. Ain't ruins dangerous to explore? Dormant security, gas builds up, loose rocks that can turn you into a pulp at any given moment. Zhangken noticed the man's hands trembling, but his tail wagging as if it belonged to a pup who just got a new toy. They just took you in then? Letting you be a part of both? They had to. It was basically their only choice at that point. It was by extortion, basically. You played dirty? All the way through, of course. I found an interesting map. Ruins of the old world were marked on it. Even the ones that we are going to, mind you. The association themselves only investigated New World ones for the sake of the understanding of the world of the Sovereign better. The Old World branch then tried to extrapolate what they could, but had no confirmation of how the world was back then. But I brought them a reason to investigate the times before that hands-on. Successfully. Looking at you now. Indeed, indeed. He grabbed it to one of his pockets and returned with nothing either. Teeyar had shuffled the cards and put down a wager. He tilted his head slightly. Huh, looks like I'm almost broke. Let's say one last game. I dare not distract you from your confessions. This could cost you your spot at the academy. Their tone was monotone by now, gaze fixed directly onto Caellam, who didn't stop smiling. Zhangken instinctively wanted to hide. This felt much like his father and mother, who turned from angry to straight-up disappointed. Between all of the classes that he had seen Gale in, they were most furious here. He filled Zhangken with fright. Caellam, on the other hand. Then what? Sure, I'll be out, but I can find you work everywhere. You, on the other hand, will you find another professor whose students are so eagerly accepted around the world? Gale didn't answer. Perhaps they were too tired to argue, or they went over threats like this much more often. Caellam very likely stirred up much more trouble than Zhangken expected. How many people have complained at the academy for his behavior, he wondered, and how much must have cost the academy? Gale breathed out slowly and then turned their back to the group. I'm going to take my rest, but know that we are approaching our limits with you. Zhangken and Teeyar stared after them, Zhangken in disbelief while the corner of Teeyar's mouth was twitching upwards. He was clearly having much more fun than he had expected. Looks like I'm doing quite the balancing act here. In that case, I can raise the stakes even more. I'm going all in. Caellam put down an entire cube filled with small diamonds. A small fortune was resting on the ground now. Teeyar and Zhangken fixed their eyes on it. At the sight, Teeyar's tail began wagging furiously and his ears folded backwards. He put his entire winnings and some of the vials on him, including the ones that Zhangken used to pay for the trip forwards. Figured you'd agree. With your carriage, we'd need all the ink that you can get. Figured it out already, eh? Smartass. But you're right. I need to invest a lot in her upkeep and to keep her going on the road. Got my entire life on there, and then some. Though I wonder how you knew. Oh, come on now. If it isn't pulled by animals, a sodite mechanism has to be there. That much was obvious. But I found the circuit lines, and instead of having static containers, you have the ink in constant movement for some reason. Which means that you must need a lot of it. If it completes the circuit instead of metal, there needs to be a lot. We are looking at multiple impulses of activation here, not a single static one. Yeah, you're right. But I doubt that you understand the spark that it is using, correct? Not yet. But I do have a theory. Mind telling me? Oh, I don't think so. He wagged a finger, grin widening. Even if you denied any of it, it would be easy to judge by your body language how right I am. I'd rather take her apart to see the inner workings. Well, if you can, please let me know. Self-driving carriages of any size could revolutionize travel. We would no longer be dependent on breeding animals just to carry us across the realms. Sure, but what labor would be the greater? Creating more of these carriages. Or breeding horses, oxen, and the like. You seem to be less blind to these issues than I originally expected. What a fascinating fella you are. Are you coming on to me? What? No. Zhangken left the two alone, looking for his own bedroll. While not too focused on the two and their game, he tried to listen to the noises of the forest. Some of the animals were cocky. He could hear a lot of rustling nearby. Perhaps a wild fox smelling the cooked meat. Slowly tuning out everything else, he could still hear the men laughing loudly. It reminded him of the men in pubs after a hard day at work, indulging in alcohol. But he couldn't remember the oh-so-memorable bitter taste from anything that he had tonight. So it was just their own spirits that lifted them up, and not those of the bottle. Slowly, darkness set in, as Zhangken felt the pull of sleep drag him down. He was not looking forward to it. The nightmare awaited. But people had to sleep. Escaping sleep did not work before. It only led to him losing consciousness in class. Gale didn't laugh about it, while his fellow students did. The void came to reach out, and the sensation of water filling his lungs grasped at him, but something wrestled him awake again. Yes! There we go! Caellam had jumped up in excitement, no cards in his hand. How did you... I was so close to winning! Then you just drew perfectly? Did you cheat? Why would I only cheat now? We played all day and I lost most of the time. I think my win here was a simple turn of fate. Well then, fate demands a rematch. Nah, I won. It's time to finally sleep. Oi, wait up! Wait! His voice faded out while the flames still crackled, unseen to Zhangken. On his own bedroll, he thought that he could finally get some rest as well. Instead, he stayed awake, staring at the sky, still illuminated by the green moon. The smaller moon orbiting it allowed some of the stars to shine through clearer. With his mind fading, he was wondering if it was a sign that the shadow cast in the face of the greatness would always reveal even greater things. Or perhaps if a small act next to a monument so huge, so massive, would only ever last the shortest of time. His consciousness was gone before he could decide on either, and darkness enveloped him. Zhangken heard a noise that tore him out of his sleep. He coughed reflexively. Yet the feeling of water weighing down his lungs was gone. A horrid morning ritual. Slowly he sat up upright. Dawn was creeping near, but none of the others were awake yet. Whatever rustled in the brush seemed to have only been close to him. He turned towards the noise's source and saw a shadowy figure that he couldn't quite make out disappear into it. This time he was sure that he saw it. Unmistakably, it must have been the shape of a person with clear fox ears. Could it have been Rusho? Chasing him down even here? To what end, Zhangken wondered as he got up. He had to know. He grabbed the sword that he had used for practice with Gale in case that there was an aggressive animal or brigand lurking nearby. When he knew that he was ready, he silently ventured into the forest. The forest felt strange. The woods should feel familiar. He had been around here a few times when he was younger. But today something was off. Or perhaps it was himself. The smell was not quite right. Cedar and pine had a tinge of sweetness in them that he didn't recognize. Not pleasant. More akin to mold or rot. He took step after careful step while trying to keep his eyes on his surroundings. Zhangken made sure not to disturb the flora or the fauna too much, taking big steps across patches of flowers and animal burrows. Every now and again he saw the shade that he was chasing run away, yet he was never truly able to catch up. Who or whatever he followed knew what they were doing. There were no discernible tracks, so that he had to look out for an unfamiliar movement. When coming past a small clearing, he could make out a set of footprints that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Zhangken tried tracking them down, but they disappeared just as suddenly, near a big rock that looked as if it had been slightly dislodged. For a moment he wondered what could have left a track like this, but something stirred near him. His own stupid decision was only acting up to him now. If this was Rusho, he could shout after him to get his attention. But if it was a brigand leading him into a trap, he'd just make it even worse. The doubts rising up deep inside of him made him stop in his tracks. Looking at the trees and their perfectly symmetrical grown branches, trunks all drawn out by the same pattern of bark. Why even bother, he thought. You came all this way. You left them behind. For what? To chase a fancy, a hope to see something that they never will? To become something better, leave them behind, show them what you achieved? No, you did it because you were so full of self-doubt. Too afraid to admit, to show that you were wrong. You never talked with any of them about it. Your fear is clear, they all know. But it doesn't matter. You won't see them again anyways. Something had taken root inside of him. Something stirred that he had been afraid of. He tried to distract himself, and as he stared upwards, he saw what he had been chasing. Just in reach, a few steps perhaps before him. Rusho? Is that you? The shade stopped further away. Covered by the trees, it was still hard to make out who it was. The shade looked so similar to him. Something nagged in him, something was off. But right now, he couldn't tell. It had to be him. Yet the figure did not move a bit, nor did it make a sound. Please, have you been chasing us? Chasing me? Why? Why send me letters from home if you've been around me anyways? Did you move recently? To see me? Please, I have to know. But his pleas were only answered by further silence. Not a single movement betrayed the fox's thoughts. Was he in shock? Perhaps he didn't expect to be caught. After all, he kept hidden, perhaps for a reason. Anything, just any kind of answer would be fine. Don't just leave me standing here. Once you learned, you always talk to me. So eager to share yourself. So please, please. The forest went quiet. Zhangken felt his own heartbeat, waiting for something. No bird song, no leaves rustling. Not a single mouse skittered along. It was now that Zhangken became aware that something much stranger was off. As the wind rustled the leaves once again, the rays of light should have uncovered at least Rusho's face. His clothes should react to the breeze. But they didn't. The figure moved as if it was emulating breath, yet the movement was wrong. In addition, only now did he realize there were no notches in his ears. It was as if, with a quick burst of agility, Zhangken tossed himself to the ground, just in time to avoid the strange extended arm that had instead hit the tree behind him. Zhangken stared up at the shade that he thought was his friend. Many eyes had sprouted along the surface of its body, all of them trying to look somewhere else. But as Zhangken attempted to move, they all focused at him immediately. As their gaze met, Zhangken felt a strange sensation course through his body. In his skull, something warm pulsed. His survival instinct was stronger though. He ran. Sprinting from it, he had to get away. Just as he looked back, a black tendril threw itself after him. In an attempt to use what he had been taught, Zhangken used his sword to parry. The moment of triumph, though, was short-lived. After just a moment, the metal dissolved. As he kept looking back, more creatures that looked the same had appeared from the woodwork. Liquid, shiny forms of foxes with multiple eyes were everywhere. Rocks they ran over melted akin to this sword. Yet the grass and flowers kept their shape. It was the only thing that he could observe until they assaulted him again. Zhangken desperately tried to remember where he came from. He decided to run ahead. At the dislodged boulder that he tried to take a turn, but saw that his path was blocked by more creatures. He decided to dive further into the forest instead. Right after, two creatures assaulted Zhangken with a barrage of attacks. He saw more attacks coming and somehow dodged. The eyes of those tendrils stared through him. A cold and lifeless gaze. He had to do something. His breath was already cutting short. For a moment, he closed his eyes and breathed in sharply. Take this. His desperate attempt bore fruit. The creature nearest to him caught a flame. Erratically, it moved back and forth. After mere moments, it seemed to have dissolved. Yes, finally. Zhangken couldn't contain his joy and attempted the same thing again. But nothing happened. His ink was empty. He never refilled it. An icy sensation crept up on him that immediately turned white hot. His panic immediately turned into energy, and he sprinted further away. He made an attempt to hide from his assailants by threading through the underbrush. After all, these things still had person's form. They were still hindered by the same obstacles. a small hope that he clung to. From his side, a creature emerged. He had the same black texture, yet it looked entirely amorphous. What in the name of the heart are these? Doll beasts? What are they doing here? He kept running further into the woods. It didn't matter where, just away from them. Someone! Anyone! Help! Gale! Caellam! More creatures took chase. He wasn't nimble and had to avoid as many assaults as possible. At least, they only struck when having direct sight. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! He tried to shout for help a few more times. But soon he realized that he strayed too far from the others. In that moment, he noticed a tentacle too late. It cleanly pierced through his leg. In his mind, he braced for the pain that never came. Confused, he paused for just a heartbeat and got stuck by his side by another. He felt the warm blood ooze from his wounds. Dark patches of goo and blood mixed on his clothes. In panic, he tried to feel if there were more points of impact. Zhangken stopped paying attention to the forest and missed a huge root on the ground. He stumbled and fell. Immediately, he attempted to get up, but his wounded leg didn't have the strength. He noticed his attackers had fallen behind at least. Perhaps they couldn't find him. Or were they actually watching from far away, treating him like a hurt animal that wasn't worth expending energy on? Zhangken laid back and closed his eyes. This was it for him then. No goodbyes to his family. No last words to rush out to Gale or Caellam. No step further to the truth of what happened to the world. Instead, he would be killed like some common hare. Would they even eat him? Or just dissolve him, leaving nothing behind? A terrible thought. To leave no legacy. Not even a corpse. Zhangken prayed to whatever powers that there were that these creatures would leave Caellam and the others alone. Something approached him. He didn't dare to look into those lifeless eyes again. If they hurt him, he couldn't feel it anyways. The end would come soon. But it didn't. Get up! He opened his eye. A scene that left him even more shocked than the other one that he ran from played out in front of him. What? I said get up. The one that had come to his rescue was neither of the people that Zhangken expected, but instead a snow leopard wielding a spear. Quickly, he pierced one of the creatures with his weapon that dared to approach. Who are you? Call me. I'm gonna assume that is a Chinese X, so it would be Cher. Can you stand? I can, yes, though I got hit a few times. Try to stop the bleeding then. Do you have any weapons? No, my sword melted as it touched them, and I'm out of ink. He raised a brow, but kept his stance. Fine, stay behind me then. Done as he was told, Zhangken tried to keep himself behind Cher as he twirled the spear around and got rid of more of the things. Zhangken shouted as one of them tried to attack their side, but Cher grunted and swung his spear around. In response, a solid stone pillar pierced one of the creatures, leaving it to struggle on the spike. What did you... Cher screamed a battle cry and lifted his spear up first and then swung it to the side, commanding a volley of rock shards to be lifted from the earth and rain onto a group of their assailants. The way that he wielded both weapons and reshaped stone filled him with awe. Gale was right, he felt with a tinge of guilt. A last creature was left over that tried to scurry away, but Cher threw his spear at it, making it dissolve as well. Hope that was the last of them. As quickly as it had flown away, did the spear return to his grasp. Thank you so much for saving me. He grunted in return. What's your name? I'm Zhangken, a student of the Twistwood Academy. Ah, no wonder you have run out of ink then. I assume that you don't need to be prepared for life or death situations so much over there. Zhangken winced at that. In the end, he couldn't defend himself. If not for the help, he'd be dead by now. Cher let his gaze wander over the immediate vicinity, then put his spear down with a quick grumble. He stood perfectly still. He ducked down to Zhangken, who had sat down inspecting his clothes. You got some wounds. Can I see them? He felt the warmth quickly rise in his head, but cool down quickly again. Oh, sure, here. Zhangken exposed his body, blood still spilling from the wounds. It's no good. They got your eye as well? Oh, no, that's something that I had for a while now. I see. I will still apply first aid, but more needs to be done. Wish Yves was here. Are there any other people nearby? Sheer produced a thick roll of bandages and began covering Zhangken at the point of puncture. Zhangken braced to be handled as roughly as by his mother when he got hurt, but instead of being yanked into position, the man's touch was gentle and focused. He winced again at the cool touch of the man's paws, together with the bandages. An apology tried to escape his lips. It's fine. Probably your first wounds. The adrenaline still rushing through his veins made him forget that he rarely had been touched as gently as this. He had no time to focus on it now. Shear took out a vial into which he filled the blackened substance that had amassed on his wounds, then took out another clear one. Oh, that smells horrid. What is that? Alcohol for disinfecting. Being attacked by dull spawn is extremely dangerous as they numb the parts that they breach. If left unattended for too long, you'd yield some infection sooner or later. Dull spawn? That's what we call them. You should have heard of these creatures before. They being shown up around the areas where dull beasts appear. So there is... Yes, that's the reason why currently I am here. A massive dull beast has been sighted, and we need to take care of it. Oh, flames. My hometown is nearby. What if they are in danger? The imminent danger is the people that you came here with. Can you point me where they are? I might remember from the forest path. Please take me along. I would normally refuse. But you're also not safe in the forest. Quickly, Shear lifted Zhangken onto his shoulders. Afterwards, he quickly picked up his spear again. Only now did he notice that Shear was missing an entire arm. He felt dizzy for a moment, then tried to balance himself. Zhangken wasn't good at riding horses. How was he supposed to not fall off the shoulders of a man? Shear started walking and quickly began to pick up the pace. The two accelerated with a speed that he didn't anticipate, but Shear kept Zhangken balanced. How are we? I'm slightly shifting the ground beneath my feet. This allows me to take longer and quicker steps. You recognize any of this? Just a moment. Yes, the shadows have shifted, but I think that I remember some of this. Zhangken pointed in the direction and Shear followed it. What made you come here in the first place? Entering the forest on your own is dangerous already. You could have been assaulted by a bear or a wolf. I saw something. Someone, rather. When they initially assaulted me, the dull spawn looked like a friend. He attacked me back in town, so I thought that he followed me here. How strange. I never heard of a case of dull spawn taking the form of people. Have you been hunting them for long? Some 10 years by now, I think. Is that how you lost the arm as well? No. The answer was blunt, but sadness came with it. Zhangken put his hand up to his bandage. For just a moment he felt kindred with the man. Before he could think any further, the surroundings became familiar again. There! We need to exit over there. It was hard to stick to the man's shoulders, but somehow he kept the balance. As they exited the brush, they stumbled upon the empty camp that Zhangken had left behind. The supplies had been carried out for the night were strewn about, showing signs of struggle. Droplets of blood and hasty footsteps were drawn on the ground. Zhangken paid no attention to the still burning campfire and saw something in the distance. He spotted the wagon surrounded by dark figures that spilled from the forest. They clashed with two more familiar shapes. We have to help them. Sure didn't answer. He gently helped Zhangken off his shoulders and ran towards the battle. Oh, okay. So that is, to be continued, I guess. So, yeah. It's been a while since, I read the story. I had forgotten about, Rusho, the guy that had apparently been friends with or something more with Zhangken. and who had apparently shown up when he wasn't supposed to. I am curious if perhaps him showing up has something to do with what's going on right now, referring to the shadows, because it seems interesting that they took the form of a fox to lure Zhangken out, and then eventually more formed shadows came out, or I guess they're what they're called dull spawn. So they seemed very intent to get his attention, specifically Zhangken's, and to attack him. I mean, they ended up attacking the wagon also, as they are doing right now. But it seemed very interesting that they wanted him specifically at first. And I wonder if it has to do with trying to isolate him specifically and either get rid of him specifically or something else. I also don't remember specifically if people with a spark require ink or they don't. Because I know that that the sword guy, Gale, I know he has a vial of ink on a necklace, but it looks like his spark allows him to just use what he has to use at a whim. But no, because Zhangken also has a spark, and it's to be able to store things, or to store a flame, I guess. At least that's what he does now. But and it does require ink in order to take out what he has stored and attack with it, or use it and then put it back in. It has been a very long time since I read the first build, so yeah. I do recall, I think, that the big raccoon, Caellam, whatever his name was, that he did not have a spark, and that it was very unusual, but like that he was just accomplished regardless. I don't recall if it was explicitly said or if it was hinted at or something. I am just slightly curious, mildly curious, I guess you could say, to find out more about the merchant and what his deal really is. Also, now it makes sense why the moon in the background of this is green, and it's because their moon is green. It gives off green light. It doesn't it's not like ours where it's just light that we're used to. Like, could you imagine going outside and it's like a full moon and all you see is green? Basically like a green tint over everything. What else? What else? I'm curious as to how these dull beasts and dull spawn work. Why they were able to dissolve certain things but not others. If they have like a natural resistance, or they dissolve naturally metals, which would be like the metal of the sword, but also maybe whatever composes the rocks and stuff like that. Because I mean, a rock isn't metallic, but it does contain something, right? But it doesn't dissolve organic material? Because it left the trees and the flowers alone. It did pierce Zhangken's flesh when it attacked him. But, I mean, anything that pierces or that, like, attacks you with such force could, pierce your skin. So, What else? Who this new character is, the snow leopard, where he came from. Who this person that he was referring to also is. If there's going to be more characters showing up. If anyone is going to die. But yeah. Anyway, so what are your thoughts so far? I probably should put up another advisory or whatever to tell the people beforehand, like, hey, you might want to watch or reread the first part of this story first before you watch this video, because it's been I want to say it's been a while because it does definitely seem like it's been a year since I read this. Which, I mean, technically it has been because I think I read this in 2024. It's already 2025. It's already 2025 and it feels like it's already been even longer than that because of what's going on. Jesus. Ugh. Anyways, so yeah. Write down in the comments what you think, and thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play Sparks A Tale of Ink yourself, you can do so by going down into the link in the description, which would have a direct link for the itch.io page where you can download the game and play it yourself, or you can just go to itch.io.com and search up Sparks A Tale of Ink yourself and download it. If they have any form of support, I will be linking that down as well. I don't remember if they do or don't, because again, it's been a while. And all my pertinent links will also be linked down in the description as well as, my Ko-fi in case you want to support me through there, my Throne in case you want to buy me a book or something. It doesn't have to be the book. Or the link to become a channel member in case you want to, do that and watch these videos as they're being scheduled, because this is being recorded on January the 22nd. So channel members will probably be seeing that on the 23rd or the 24th. And everyone else probably won't see it until February. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah. I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.